Good morning. This is Dr. Janardhan Rao, working in the Aeronautical Engineering College. We're discussing about operating systems. The previous classes we discussed about a lot many concepts. Today my concept is what is deadlock and deadlock conditions, and we'll see one by one. Okay, we'll discuss what is this deadlock and what is deadlock conditions. So let us assume there are three processes P1, P2 and P3. There are three different resources R1, R2, R3. R1 is assigned to P1 and R2 is assigned to P2 and R3 is assigned to P3. So let us see after some time P1 demands R1 which is being used by P2. P1 halts its execution since it cannot complete without R2. P2 also demands for R3 and which is being used by P3. P2 also stops execution because it cannot continue without R3. P3 also demands for R1 which is being used by P1. Therefore, P3 also stops its execution. So let us see this concept. So in this scenario, a cycle is being formed among the three processes. None of the processes is progressing and they are all waiting. The computer becomes unresponsive since all the processes got blocked. So here P1 is held with R1 and it wants requesting for R2 because R2 is held with the P2. But at the same time P2 is not releasing R2 because it is being held with R2, but it is being requested by P1. So that's what we'll see now. P3 and R3. R3 is held with the P3. R3 is a resource held with P3, and now P2 is requesting for R3. At the same time, P3 is holding R3 and it requesting for R1. So like this is circular wait. So R1 is being held with P1 and requesting for R2, and P2 is held with R2 and requesting for R3, and P3 held with R3 and requesting for R1. So this is never ends process. So no process releasing its resource which is being held by that resource. So that's what for completion of the P1 requires two resources. One is R1 and R2. But R1 is there, but R2 is held with the P2. So it is not releasing the R2. P2 is not releasing R2, and P1 wants to complete its task. R1 plus R2 both, it requires both. But R2 is with P2, so P2 cannot release R2. So that's what. So difference between starvation and deadlock. What is deadlock and what is starvation? In the deadlock is a situation where no process got blocked and no process proceeds further because it requires the resource, but that resource is not available with the OS that is already held with some other process. So that is called deadlock. So if you look at this, starvation is a situation where the low priority process got blocked and the high priority processes proceed. That is called starvation. So high priority process is being executed, but whereas low process is keep on waiting. So keep on waiting for how long? That is we don't know how long it will continue. That's called starvation. Starvation is that condition. Deadlock is an infinite waiting. Deadlock is infinite waiting because no process is releasing its holding resource. So that is infinitely. It is always infinitely. Infinite waiting. Starvation is long waiting, but no infinite. Starvation, as soon as the high priority process releases its resource, then low priority process will take off and execute it. So every deadlock is always a starvation. Every starvation needs to be deadlock. So the requested resource is blocked by other process. So the requested resource is continuously be used by the higher priority process. So deadlock happens when mutual exclusion, hold and wait, no preemption, and circular wait occurs simultaneously. So starvation occurs, it occurs due to the uncontrolled priority and the resource management. So that's the difference between the starvation and deadlock. Deadlock is a situation where a set of processes are blocked because each process is holding a resource and waiting for another resource acquired by some other process. So consider an example when two trains are coming towards each other on the same track, and there is only one track. One of these trains can move once they are in front of each other. So a similar situation occurs in operating system when there are two or more processes that held some resource and wait for resource held by others. So, for example, in the below diagram, process 1 is holding resource 1 and waiting for resource 2, which is acquired by process 2, and process 2 is waiting for resource 1. So, this is we can see that one, resource 2, process 1, process 2. This is process 1, and having the resource 1 but requesting for the waiting for the resource 2. So, same way, process 2, it is assigned to process 2 and resource 2, but requesting for waiting resource 1. So both are requesting, but one is requesting, process 1 is requesting for the resource 2, and process 2 is requesting for the resources 1. So both are held by some different processes. So this is called, they never release each process. So this is called deadlock. So deadlock can arise if the following four conditions hold simultaneously. What are the four conditions? Mutual exclusion, when two or more resources are non-shareable, only one process can use at a time, because it is not, they are mutually exclusive. So second one is hold and wait. Hold and wait. A process is holding at least one resource and waiting for the other resource. That's called hold and wait. So no preemption. So a resource cannot be taken from a process unless the process releases the resource. A resource cannot be taken because already one resource is being held by the process 1, and it's requesting process 2. So resource 2. So already resource 2 is held with somebody else. So preemption means forcefully we can vacate the resource from the process. So no preemption means we cannot ask process 1 to release its resource 1 already requesting by somebody else. So that is, we don't have the force, or forcefully we cannot vacate that resource from the process 1. So that is called no preemption. Because of non-preemption, a resource cannot be taken from a process unless the process releases it itself after completion of its task. That's called no preemption. So circular wait. A set of processes are waiting for each other in a circular form. So as in the previous example, process 1, process 2, process 3, and process 1 is waiting for resource 2, and that resource is held with process 2, and that process 3 is waiting for the process 1, and that is being held with the process 1. So this is called circular wait. So unless process 3 releases, and process 1 also will not release. So this is because of non-preemption capacity. We cannot forcefully vacate the process or we release the resource from its holding. So because of that reason, we cannot preempt the resource from the process. So a set of processes are waiting in the queue, or circular form. So waiting for one's resource. So deadlock characterization. So one is mutual exclusion. Only one process at a time can use the resource. So this is mutual exclusion. Only one process at a time can use the resource. So no two processes can share that resource at a time. That is called mutual exclusion. The resource can only be shared in mutual exclusive manner. It implies if two processes cannot use the same resource at the same time, that is P1 P1 is one process and P2 is one process. The resource, the R1 is the resource. So if they can use R1, if the P1 and P2 can use R1 at the same time, then that is called mutual exclusion is crossed or curtailed. So there is no chance of deadlock because process P1 and process P2 both can use it. So this is called mutual exclusion. So only one you can use at a time, that is called our mutual exclusion. Hold and wait. A process holding at least one resource is waiting to acquire additional resource held by the other process. We have seen the previous one. P1 is process and P2 is another process, and it is held with the R1 and it is held with the R2. So it is held. So now requesting for the R2. R2 is being held with the P2. So same time P2, for completion of P2 it requires R1 R2. R2 is being held with the P1. So process 1. So and it is holding P2 and requesting for the another resource. So this is because this reason this hold and wait. A process waits for some resource while holding another resource at the same time. This is called hold and wait. In the hold and wait, so this process is called what? This condition also leads to the deadlock. So no preemption. Already we discussed about the no preemption. A resource can be released only voluntarily by the process holding it after the process has completed task. So every process will execute it. This is executing itself, completing the task. If one process holding one resource and if he requires another resource, is holding and requesting for the another resource for the execution. So unless that requesting is not granted, so he will be keep on waiting. That is, we will not release its resource already holding. So that's what a resource can be released only voluntarily, because once he completes his task or completes the execution, then only it releases the process. Resource. So after that process has completed task, then only he will release the resource. So this process, the process which once scheduled will be executed till the completion. No other process can be scheduled by the scheduler meanwhile. So this means we cannot stop it. Once it is planned, means it has to complete its task. So that's what no preemption. We cannot stop it in between. That is called no preemption. So circular wait. Already we discussed in circular wait. There exists a set of processes P0, P1, P, so on. A waiting process such that P0 is waiting for a resource that is held by P1. P1 is waiting for resource that is held by P2. So on. Pn minus 1 is waiting for a resource that is being held by Pn, and P0 is waiting for a resource held by the P0. Like so on. If P1 is waiting, the rest of a result which is already held by P1, or all the process must be waiting for the resource in a cycle. So man in this manner, so in cyclic manner, so that the last process is waiting for the resource which is being held by the first process, the circular wait. So this is process. He is waiting for somebody. He is already holding one, and he is waiting for already held by somebody else. So similarly, he is waiting for, this is Pn and P0. It is holding on something and asking for the requesting for the resource being held by the P. So circular wait. This is called our circular wait, and this also causes a deadlock. So deadlock ignorance. So how we can ignore the deadlock? The deadlock ignorance is the most widely used approach among all the mechanisms. This is being used by many operating systems, mainly for end user uses. In this approach, the operating system assumes that the deadlock occurs. It simply ignores the deadlock. This approach is best suitable for a single end user system, where a user uses the system only for browsing and all other normal stuff. So there is always a trade-off between correctness and performance. The operating system like Windows and Linux only focus upon performance. and deadlock prevention. So deadlock prevention only when the mutual exclusion hold and wait, no preemption, circular wait holds simultaneously. So if it is possible to violate the one of the four conditions at any time, then the deadlock can never occur in the system. The idea behind the approach is very simple, that we have to fail one of the four conditions, but there can be a big argument and its physical implementation in the system. So any one condition of the four conditions breaks, then we can prevent the deadlock. So deadlock evidence. If deadlock evidence, the operating system checks whether the system is in the safe state or in unsafe state. At every step which the operating system performs, the process continues until the system is in the safe state. When the system moves to unsafe state, the OS has to backtrack one step. So, in simple words, the OS reviews each allocation so that the allocation doesn't cause the deadlock in the system. Deadlock detection and recovery. So the deadlock lets the approach let the process fall in the deadlock, then periodically check whether the deadlock occurs in the system or not. If it occurs, then it implies some of the recovery methods to the system to get rid of the deadlock. So whenever deadlock supposed to going to occur, automatically operating system will check it and try to avoid the deadlock. That is called deadlock avoidance and deadlock detection and recovery. So in this concept, there are three ways of handling deadlocks. One is deadlock prevention and avoidance. Do not allow the system get into the deadlock state. And deadlock detection recovery, abort a process or a prompt some resources when deadlocks are detected. So ignore the problem altogether. If the if deadlocks only occurs once a year or so, it may be better to simply let them happen and reboot necessary than to incur the constant overhead and system performance penalties associated with the deadlock prevention and detection. So it is important to prevent deadlock before it can occur. So the system checks every transaction before it executed to make sure it doesn't lead to deadlock situation, such that even small change to occurs deadlock deadlock that can operation which can lead to deadlock in the future. It will also never allow process to execute. It is a set of methods for ensuring that at least one of the conditions cannot be held. So these are the four conditions we should avoid it. At least one avoids breaks, then deadlock will not occur in the system. So deadlock can be prevented at least one of the four required conditions break. So what are the four conditions we have seen? We have seen that mutual exclusion. Mutual exclusion is a full form of mutex. It is a special type of binary semaphore which use it for controlling access to the shared resource. It includes a priority inheritance mechanism to avoid extended priority invasion problem. It allows current higher priority loss to be kept in the blocked state for the shortest time possible. Shared resources such as read-only files do not lead to deadlocks. So unfortunately, some resources such as the printers and tape readers require exclusive access by a single process. So deadlock prevention, hold and wait. So hold and wait condition lies when a process holds a resource and waiting for some other resource to complete the task. Deadlock occurs because there can be more than one process which are holding one resource and waiting for another in the cycle order. So, however, we have to find out some mechanism by which a process either doesn't hold any resource or doesn't wait. So we make sure like that it won't hold any resource and ask for the request for the another resource. That's called hold and wait. So we don't allow that condition. However, wait means a process must be assigned all the necessary resources before the execution starts. So a process must not wait for any resource once the execution has been. That's what we don't allow this hold and wait condition. So non-preemption we have seen. So no preemption means a resource can be released only voluntarily by the process holding it after the process has finished its task. If a process which is holding some resource requires another resource that cannot be immediately allocated to it. In this situation, the resources will be released. That is from there must be a protocol that if one process requesting one resource and holding one resource, but whatever requesting, if it is not possible to get immediately, that there must be a procedure. The holding process should release its holding request that immediately. That is called preemption. No, non-preemption. Preemption means without any force, and it should release. The process will be started only if it can regain its old resource and new one that it is requesting. If the process is requesting some other resource, when it is available, then it was given to the requesting process. So if it is held by another process that is waiting for another process source, we release it and give to the requesting process. That's what we should include programs in the OS to preempt and non-preempt, and for requesting we should not allow this non-preemption. So another one is circular wait. So in deadlock prevention we are discussing. One way to avoid circular wait is to number all resources and to require that process request resource only in strictly increasing or decreasing order. In other words, in order to request resource RJ, a process must first release all all its RI such as I greater than J. One big challenge in this scheme is determining the relative ordering of the different resources because it's circular wait. So the general idea behind deadlock evidence is to prevent deadlock from ever happening by preventing at least one of the four mentioned conditions. This requires more information about each process and tends to lead to the low device utilization. So if some algorithms are scheduler, only need to know the maximum number of each resource that a process must potentially use. The deadlock evidence the request for any resource will be granted if the resulting state of the system doesn't cause deadlock in the system. So the state of system will continuously be checked for safe and safe states. So in order to avoid deadlocks, the process must tell OS the maximum number of resources a process can request to complete its execution. The simplest and the most useful approach states that the process that declare the maximum number of resources of each type it may ever need. Deadlock evidence algorithm examples the resource allocation so that there can never be a circular wait condition. So these four conditions must be avoided. Safe and unsafe states. The resource allocation states of a system can be defined by the instances of available and allocated resources and the maximum instance of the resources demanded by the process. The state of a system in record some random time is shown below a resource assigned. So we will see this example. In this one, the process A, process B, process C, process A, process B, process D, like this process are there. So process A request this type 1, type 2, type 3, like this. It requires these are resources. These are resources, these are the processes. So A requires type 1, type 2, type 3, type 4. So that is like this. So this is a if one process asking one type of resource, if we allot this one, and at the same time some other process also requesting for the same process, the same type, and if we don't have, and the system will be in a prolonged manner, waiting manner, starvation manner. So we should make sure that the safety algorithm. This is called safety algorithm or Bankel's algorithm. So in this one, deadlock the above table and vector EP and E describes the resource allocation states of a system. There are four processes and types of the resources in a system. Table 1 shows the instance of each resource assigned to this process. Table 2 shows the instance of the resources each process will need. Vector E is a representation of total instance of each resources in the system. Vector P represents the instance of the resources that have been assigned to process. Vector E represents the number of resources that are not in use. A state of the system is called safe if the system can allocate all the resources of requested by the process without entering any deadlock. If the system cannot fulfill the request of all the processes, then the state of the system is called unsafe. So the key of deadlock evidence approach is when the request is made for resources, then the request must only be approved by the case if this is a result state is in the safe state. We will stop it and we will see the resource allocation graph and save bankers algorithm in the next class.
Like, share and subscribe. Hit the bell icon for more updates.